Welcome back to Operator Syndrome. I'm Patrick here with Steve as always, and we're going to get into Steve's first deployment. We'll talk a little bit about the workup, and we'll talk about what it was like on his first trip overseas as a honest to goodness Navy SEAL. So we left off, we were talking about the type of roles that make up a SEAL platoon, you know,
Mm.
and what kind of qualifications you all needed before you headed out um, on your first trip. Let's start with, so you said you were an air guy, you were one of the parachuting experts. Are those the qualifications that you had to to get up to snuff with on that first workup?
Yeah, definitely. Uh, yeah, I was the main air guy in that platoon. We didn't even. I think I was the only parachute rigger in the platoon.
Mm,
So I had to be up on everything that we might use to insert or extract. So I had to be up on fast ropes. I had to be up on all our rappelling gear, of course,
mhm,
parachutes, spy rig, anything we might need. And I had to get qualified on it because it was like you got to get signed off on it all. So I went bouncing around to a lot of those schools after what we tried to do. The way our workups work, we would go to these different schools that we had to, a combat swimmer course. It's an advanced combat swimmer course where you learn to it takes it way beyond buds. Your dives are longer, they're more clandestine, they're harder, a lot harder. I mean, some of our dives were up pushing 2 hours underwater, getting up like running a marathon. And it's hard, man. It's not easy to dive. You're kicking the whole way with a little compass board. One guy's what's called driving the board, looking at a compass, and the other guy's just um, flying with his hand, keeping pace.
mhm,
Uh, One guy keeps pace, one guy navigates with your swim buddy, and you're tethered together, and you're just cruising along like anything. And these were long dives and cold. We did one combat swimmer course in Bangor, Washington, um, and it wasn't a warm time of year. It was like March or April or something like that. It was. I remember our dives were between 45 and 50 degrees, which even with a
wow.
wetsuit on, you get the big ice cream headache going. And it's a rigorous course, the combat swimmer. And then we had to go prepare for jungle, we went to Panama for that, down in Central America. We went
Mhm.
to Arctic warfare up in Kodiak, Alaska. Some stories there, man, I tell you.
Did you excuse me, but so did you know where you were going for that first deployment during the workup?
Yeah.
Was that settled yet? And then if the first one, I think you should have said yes. And if that's the case, so your first one, you're gonna end up going to the Philippines. But how does it feel doing training in an Arctic environment when you're like, we're going to the Philippines? Like, why am I
Philippines. Yeah,
what
yeah.
what is that like? What's the thought process behind that?
Yeah, it's kind of strange. I guess the idea would be that that a, that a fully qualified SEAL platoon has to pretty much be able to strike anywhere. I mean, just because you're stationed in the Philippines, I mean, for example, we did a lot of Operation Full Eagle, which is a joint readiness exercise against North Korean aggression, and it was a whole huge op. I mean, everybody, Navy, Army, Air Force, and we that's getting cold. I mean, you get into some of the Korean mountains, and man,
Mhm.
it's freezing and it's snow and stuff like that. So you might have to use that kind of stuff.
Mm.
So we're just kind of getting, and here's another thing. Even though we were slotted to go on what's called a Westpac, Western Pacific deployment, which was at that time Subic Bay Naval Base in the Philippines in Olongapo City. We no longer have any bases in the Philippines. We pulled out of there. So now the closest place guys go is Guam, which is an American territory, and we have a big base there, big Air Force base and everything else. So
Right.
we knew we were slotted to go there. But here's the thing: if the needs of the Navy come up, and there's a hot spot in the world, you can easily be pulled and sent somewhere else. And that's what happened on my second platoon. We had just gotten back. Well, no, we didn't just gotten back. We reformed in another platoon. Some guys, the platoon dissolves.
Mm-hmm.
Officers go on to other commands. Some guys end up going to a year-long school. Good deal. Guy gets on the leapfrogs, goes away, and then you get a handful of new guys that are just out of buds. And so we reformed after we got back up. But just giving you an example,
Right.
we were in it was Foxtrot platoon, and a real hot shot platoon. I mean, we had some really good guys and an excellent officer, Tommy Dietz. He just squared away as they come. And we got well, we were doing our workup, getting ready to go to the Philippines, and we were like a month from deploying to the Philippines. In fact, I had just gotten back from Sodik. I went to Sodik, and this is an interesting story. I mean, there's myself and Bruce. He was a sniper for a sister platoon, but we went back and forth as spotter sniper for each other. And so we were both fully qualified Category 1 snipers. We both graduated. And the Green Beret, it was a special forces school at the JFK Spec War Center. And so there were mostly Green Berets. And like I said, we had some Rangers and I think a couple recon Marines on. And they invited us to go to the Green Beret Club on Fort Bragg, which was kind of an exclusive place. It was like, you got to either know or be with the Green Beret to get in there. And I think it was just called the Green Beret Club. Big pool table, big screen TV, bar basically.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess we had bonded with those guys. You go through a school like that, you either get over it or not. But we were cool with everybody. And they invited us to come. I thought it was a big honor. I was like, wow, this is cool. And all the Vietnam stuff on the walls. It's
Right.
what a storied tradition. So we're shooting pool. At in this bar, having a beer, being thankful we're done with that school. And up on the screen, this was the early days of CNN. CNN was like a brand new thing. It was like cable news network. What is this? And we look up, and there's an aircraft carrier battle group going into the Persian Gulf. And we're like, huh? And it said Saddam Hussein forces have invaded Kuwait. And it just happened. It happened that night. We were watching the first live footage of this. I mean, the Navy over the Seventh Fleet was already responding. I think it was Seventh Fleet. But anyway, they were starting to get in position. And I just thought, whoa, this could be interesting because we haven't had a big scale war or buildup in a long time. It was a relative peaceful time, a few hiccups here and there. So I remember getting a Newsweek magazine. Bruce and I were flying back to San Diego like civilian, which we did a lot. Everybody does that a lot. But I remember reading on the plane this Newsweek magazine, and it said, will President Bush respond with force on the ground, with boots on the ground to this new problem? We landed, we shared a cab, we got a cab back to the base, had all our gear, and we get back to SEAL Team 5, and they dropped us off in the back. You can go in the back way, there's a combo on the gate, or you can go in the front across the quarterdeck. But we went in the back way, and I looked over, and there's it must have been 6 aircraft pallets loaded with cargo straps ready to go. And I'm like, it was sitting right next to our platoon space. And I was like, crap. And then I remember Brad O'Neill. He was one of my best friends. He died in 2000. He came walking out, I remember, and I just looked at him. I was like, what's up, man? He goes, you got 2 days to settle up with your landlord and figure stuff out. We're going to Saudi Arabia. That's the word. And it was like, holy smoke. I mean, just got off the plane reading this, and here's all our equipment. So I had to jump through my ass trying to get, logistical stuff. Fortunately, I didn't have a family. I mean, I had a girlfriend, but it was like I was traveling lean and mean. So I was like, I'm ready to roll. It's kind of exciting when you're, you've been training all this time, and it's like, yeah, man. And I know that now I look back on it, I'm like, well, if I knew then what I know now. But yeah. And so we headed out. So all that's a long-winded way of saying, we were slotted to go to the Philippines, but because we were the most ready platoon to deploy. We had like 2 weeks left and we were going to go to PI.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, there was nobody else east or west coast that was that close to being, all the wickets were checked. So we were one of the our platoon and our sister platoon who was going to deploy with us to the Philippines. We both were loaded on a C5 Galaxy and flew the god awful flight all the way to Saudi Arabia.
I want to
So
talk about that a little bit, because I've heard of that before. I,
mhm.
I don't know if it's the same, if it was the same thing in my time in the Rangers, but I've heard that during the workup there is that element of competition between the platoons,
Yeah.
um, for the prime, the most desired sort of, tasking for deployment. So that was the case back then. Even, well, it sounded like it was two things. It sounded like you had a platoon that had its stuff together, but
Yep.
then also you had progressed far enough along, like you said, you had most of the wickets done, so it's kind of a no brainer. These are the folks that need to go. What's it like? So that's we'll talk about that, because when we
Mm-hmm.
get to talking about you in Desert Storm, we'll talk about what it was like being the chosen ones to go and to do the work. But but what's it like to be what's that experience to be the average platoon? Or dare I say the worst? Someone's got to be last. So
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
worst platoon. I mean, I don't know if in your other workups and
Yeah.
train ups you had fallen victim to being in the middle of the pack, or if you had a platoon that just couldn't get its stuff together, and you were at the bottom. But can you describe that experience at all? Like
Yeah.
what it's
Yeah.
like for them, what that might feel like?
Yeah, for sure. And it's kind of an interesting story because we, so sometimes you know how it is in a unit, you just have a chemistry that gels.
Yep.
And, I don't know what it is. The stars align. A lot of it is, do you have a good platoon commander? It was a mixed bag. It was a
Mhm.
mixed bag. I tended to see that the Naval Academy officers tended to be a little better, honestly.
Okay.
Not to say there weren't great non-Naval Academy officers. There
Right.
were
Of
plenty,
course.
but as the track record I saw and I watched carefully, there was just a level of, there were just seemed to be a notch above on average. There's always exceptions. So yeah, so there's this competition. It's like, and now I think they rank platoons so that everybody can see it. Because I remember that from Gallagher's book, like they were the number one platoon. Well, yeah. So there's the readiness factor, like how far are you into the workup, because that's going to make you much more deployable if a crisis happens,
Mhm.
because you're that much more trained up. But then also there's inner platoon. We had a hot shot platoon. It was just one of those platoons. Not everyone was that good, but that platoon was real good. All the guys were really sharp, pretty squared away, pretty just driven. And we had great leadership. So we did a training exercise out at this place called Nyland, California. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's our base it's the West Coast base to do all kinds of stuff. We have a huge sniper range. We have kill houses. We have, you name it, land warfare. There's hundreds of acres. It's a big gunnery range where they drop bombs in the Chocolate Mountains up, up to the sort of east of our base. And we had FTXs. I don't know if you call them that in the Army, final training
Mhm.
exercises.
Yep.
FTX, yeah.
Yep.
So I was the point man, and it. So the other platoon, our sister platoon, who was training alongside of us, we call them sister platoons because you go together. Your workups are roughly doing the same thing,
Mhm.
and you're on the same track usually. So our sister platoon was um, would act as the aggressors in a training scenario. So we've got the training department watching us, and we had to hit a target. It was a it was a it wasn't really a raid. It was a direct action attack on a like a comm station, basically, with some you know troops around.
Mhm.
And so that was our FTX. That was our final getting graded on that before we went overseas.
Mhm.
and they're watching us close. And our sister platoon were going to be the QRF that was going to come in and try to get us. And I think we were using simunitions or one of those early versions of, you could shoot each other, and it was those things you wore, the harness, I don't know, it had blanks, but
Miles, the
yeah,
Miles
miles
gear, that,
gear,
yeah,
miles gear, that's what it was. It was clunky, but
right.
anyway, we didn't want to get shot. We didn't want to look. I mean, here we are. All the guys at the teams who are the most experienced are watching us and grading us.
Mm-hmm.
And I was the point man that night, and we'd hit the target. And then we got the radio guy says, "All right, we got a QRF coming in here, or a reactionary force. I don't even know what you call it. We've got enemy aggressors coming in on our
Right.
butts."
Right.
And that was the other platoon.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, because it was a channelized area. We had hubbed in, and there was these berms kind of on both sides. It was like a wash in the desert. And I'm like, man, we have got to get some cover so that we can engage these guys or counter engage. And I'm like, looking, and it's dark. You know how it is. I'm like, freaking heck, everybody's following me. I got to get us out of this. And I look over, and there's a slice in the berm. It's like a little channel that just goes out, and they're coming on this way, full frontal, coming on where we patrolled. And I said, I made the motions, follow me. We're going this way. We peeled off, and it was really cool because it basically just peeled us off along this berm on the other side of the berm. And I once the platoon was all the way through, I'm like, let's set up on the top of this berm, because they're going to be coming right along there. And sure enough, they weren't ready for us. They were just trying to haul ass in there and get us, or at least mix it up and make it look messy for us. And we had formed an online ambush at the top of that berm. And then I told the rear security, pop a flare when the first guy gets by you, and then we're just going to shoot him like fish in the barrel. He sent up a parachute flare, and it was like, and they're like, whoa. And we're just like, pop, pop, pop. We had him. I mean, yeah. It was such a good feeling. And the trainers are like, that was a smooth move. But it was total luck. If I hadn't seen that thing, it would have been totally something else came out of it. But because of all of that, that's just one story. We were like the top dudes. And that's why we got the biggest op later. When we talk about Desert Storm, I mean, it made the cover of Newsweek, the what we did that night. But anyway, whatever. Yeah. So there's these performance levels, and they're looking at everybody. And you've got two squads. You got first squad and second squad is what we called it. And first squad are your top performers, top performers. In a typically, now that it could have changed, it could be, I don't know,
Sure.
but your second platoon, your first platoon had your platoon commander as your patrol leader, right? So there would be 8 of us in a squad.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so first squad would be your platoon commander, who's in control of the entire platoon.
Right.
He's usually a lieutenant, 02 or 03 or 04. I don't know what it is anymore, but it's usually a lieutenant, which is an 03. And then you would have your first class petty officer. And then your chief, which is the senior most enlisted, would be in second squad as sort of to guide and help the assistant platoon commander, which was usually like an ensign or an 02, who was the patrol leader in that platoon. So, and then your primary sniper is going to be in first squad. Your best radio man is going to be your best medic. Now that varied sometimes, because sometimes your LPO might be your best medic and he was going to be in second squad, but usually you put your it's kind of like varsity versus junior varsity.
Mm-hmm.
But I say that, and there were times when there were guys that were equally good as anybody in first squad that ended up in second squad for whatever reason. So it wasn't always that way. But
was there ever any risk, if the platoons were being ranked,
mm-hmm.
let's say the very last platoon, was there ever a risk of doing a whole workup and then not deploying at all? Was that ever a risk, or they were just going to get sent to the absolute least desirable?
Yeah. the least desirable place. I've never heard of a platoon being stood down because they were just soup sandwiches or something.
Mm-hmm.
But it could have happened. It never happened that I ever saw.
Mm-hmm.
But like you say, it's a good deal, bad deal,
Right.
kind of deal. Yeah. So and
So,
then
so
we yeah. Go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say um, there were other SEAL platoons who ended up coming over to Saudi during Desert Storm.
Mm-hmm.
Quite a few others, but we were the first on the ground, and it was weird. I mean, craziest thing I've ever seen. It was like a dream because here we are getting ready to, I mean, doing a conventional buildup with tanks and Bradleys, and it's like massive numbers of. And then we were told, we were like, we had so many questions. We're on this long flight on the C5, and they said just be ready to fight your way off the aircraft because we don't know what. And we're like, oh, nice, okay, well, that could get exciting. And they're like, oh, and by the way, it's averaging 126 degrees every day. It was August, thank you. So it's like, man, we're gonna have more heat casualties than we do.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a special type of. I think my first deployment, I had joined up in the middle of a. I joined up in the middle, and we took sort of a weird. Usually, we had direct flights from where we were stationed. We jump on a C-17 reserved just for us, and we fly directly to wherever we were going to be. So that was nice. But going halfway through, you had to catch like the different rotators, right, and the different sort of chartered flights, and we ended up for a couple days in like UAE or Qatar,
yeah,
somewhere like that. Just one of those places where the
yeah,
heat is just
yeah.
insane.
It's
And I,
insane.
and I was just like, whoa, this
No.
is like you can't even imagine this. Like you look at the picture, and you're like, yeah, that looks hot, but it's a type of hot that
Oh
you're
yeah,
just not used to. And then thankfully, I mean, it's hotter there than it is. Like I would end up going to Iraq and Afghanistan. So it's
yeah,
whatever. It's a different,
yeah,
just like still desert, but slightly different climate. And I
yeah,
was like, oh, thank God. Like
yeah.
I'd much rather be here than in the UAE. Um, talk to me a little bit. Talk to us about again. You were talking about being coming into the platoon, that first workup,
Yeah,
and being the designated air guy.
they're
Like,
gonna.
hey,
Yeah.
you're it, new guy. You're the air guy. So
Yep.
talk about like that's a lot of responsibility to have to fill that role for the team and be a new guy. Did you find the platoon helped? Was it a situation where the platoon lifted you up, right? Or was it a situation where you just were felt like that responsibility crushed you and the expectations of the
Yeah.
platoon crushed you?
Yeah. At first, it was pretty crushing because
Mm,
you're gonna get your fair share of shit, and that's just the way it is.
mhm,
And I'm intimidated. I mean, these are guys are, holy crap, and you don't want to be that guy. You don't want to be the shitbird in the platoon, or get that. It's funny how you've probably seen this, like one screw up, like one, maybe it doesn't get you kicked out or it keep, but you royally blew it.
mhm, right,
And everybody sees it. And somehow that tends to stick with you.
mhm,
If you're not careful, it can stick with you. And I didn't, by God's grace, I didn't have any major blowups where I was just like, I mean, we all do some goofy mistakes when we're learning. It's just the way it is. But I mean, some guys had some royal mistakes, and it
mhm.
was like, man. But yeah, yeah, as an air guy, honestly, I think I got more slack because I was an air guy. And not that this would ever happen, of course, but I'm packing guys' parachutes, right? You get it?
You're like,
And there was
yeah,
all these this thing
if
where
there's one
I
guy
don't
you
want
don't
to
want to
push
push him.
Watkins too hard
Yeah, exactly,
because yeah,
exactly.
so I think that kind of helped me a little bit. But also, I really performed well in my first platoon in as a marksman.
Mhm,
And we went to Southern, some self-defense shooting school. It was like Shaw. It's one of those cool guy shooting
Right.
schools with like professional shooters that shoot in the
Hmm.
Bianchi Cup and all this.
Like Thunder Ranch, that was a big one
Yeah,
back in the
yeah,
day. Yeah, one
yeah.
of those
That
type
was
of
like,
deals.
yeah, all those. And it was a cool school, and I was the number one performer. And this were all older guys. I mean, everybody.
Hmm.
And I outshot. We had this one last contest. It was a combat shooting course with pistol, and we were using MP5s on this particular course.
Hmm.
And I was the fastest, and I shot the most accurately. And so, like that elevated me.
Yeah.
People were like, okay, because everything in that community is performance based. I mean, primarily,
Right.
it's like you can either do it or you can't, and we don't have a lot of patience for guys who are just farting around and really
Hmm.
not serious. So I think my performance, the fact that I was an air guy, and that you start to earn people's respect. And if I try not to be an idiot. Some guys just had big mouths. That didn't help if you're a new guy.
Hmm. Right.
uh I was always like you. I was just kind of laid low. I'm like, there's trouble.
Oh
I'm
yeah.
gonna go this way. I'm not gonna engage the trouble. I've got
Yeah.
nothing to prove.
It always seemed like um you were better off once you showed your platoon something you were good at,
Yeah,
like you were gonna screw up, you were gonna mess up, you were gonna get in trouble, you were gonna do something stupid. Like you said, hopefully nothing that bad. But what you really wanted to do is just keep pushing and pushing and pushing until you could show them something.
yeah,
You could run fast, you could
yep,
ruck anything, you could do
yep,
this, you could do that, just something to distinguish yourself. And it definitely felt like they were looking for that too. They're
yep.
like, what does this guy bring? And
Mm.
until you, and I definitely felt like I haven't in my time, we'll talk about it when we talk about it, but when I felt like once I had that moment, I could feel some of the eyes turning
Yeah,
away. Like, okay, he's got one redeemable characteristics
yeah.
about him, and so we'll let him stay a
No,
little bit longer.
very true. Yeah, very true. It's kind of like getting your rookie season over with in sports. You score some points, you get some base hits, and people take notice.
Mhm.
So
And
yeah,
and getting that first deployment under your belt would have been a big
yeah,
part of that too, right? Because then you would have had that full platoon experience. So you end up going to the Philippines.
yeah.
How much world travel? How much traveling had you done up until this point? Had you been overseas much at all?
We other than to Panama for jungle warfare, we had not been out of CONUS.
And for you personally, even would this have been your first time over to an Asian
Yeah,
Pacific country? Yeah.
matter of fact, it was.
So what was
Other
that?
than going to Mexico on a few select occasions, we no, it was my first
Okay.
international experience.
And I feel like it's got to be a big deal. Like, do you remember flying? Okay, you fly into, I think you said Subic Bay.
Super
So you
bad.
you fly into Subic Bay. You're like, here we go. I did the
Yep.
workup. Like,
Yeah.
what was your mission?
Yeah.
What was the mission for that deployment? That first one.
Yeah, some interesting things happened on that deployment. You're right. It's cool. You're flying with a fully qualified SEAL team now. Your swagger. We and the other cool thing is I got to see how being an elite unit it has its advantages. For example, our platoon commander, he plans our flight plan, and he's just like, "All right, we're stopping in Hawaii at Hickam Air Force Base. We're stopping at Guam at Anderson Air Force Base." You always wanted to stay at an Air Force base because they had way better facilities than
Hmm.
any of the other branches. Sorry, the other branches, it's just the way it is. I think they start planning their golf courses first before they even build barracks. But anyway, I mean, they're really nice bases. And why, who, we could stay anywhere. It's got to be a military base and we want to stay on a nice one. So
Hmm.
I'm like, this is really cool because we could be over here at the Sucky base with Sucky facilities. And we basically had two guys to a hotel room,
Nice.
it's like a level of a hotel room. So that kind of stuff started you started to feel kind of sexy. And then walking around with your bling on your uniform and walking into chow halls where everybody's like pointing at you and kind of whispering like, "Ooh, those guys." It's cool, you feel really cool. But when we got there, our main mission was to train, to just stay ready. So we did jumps, we did dives, we did on the range, everything you would do in a workup, but on a smaller scale, just to keep proficient. We shot a lot. We wanted to keep our trigger fingers good, but one thing happened that was just hilarious. I mean, it wasn't hilarious in the big scheme of things, but it was. You can't make this up. We were told that we were going to go out and train the seal, the Philippine seals. Okay, the Filipino seals. This was not an elite unit by your and my standards. They were doing their best, and they just didn't have a lot of stuff,
Mhm.
money. They didn't have good training. They were doing the best, right? I mean, most of these guys couldn't even climb a ladder out of the water with full swim gear on into a helicopter. They just weren't strong enough. I mean, I felt for them, but they were trying.
Mhm.
So we went out to the place called Green Beach, which is still part of Subic Bay, but it's where you can do demo, you can shoot, you can get out. And we were just teaching them basic stuff, like basic patrolling, fire and movement. I mean, it would be no, uh, I could easily say that our regular infantry in our army is light years beyond these guys, and they're supposed to be Filipino SEALs.
Mhm.
But we're doing what we're doing, and we're helping them, and we let them shoot the sniper rifle. That was a big day, the 50 cal, and
Right.
they thought that was cool. And all of a sudden, we get a call on our radio because we're out in the middle of nowhere. We're in the boonies, and we had to take a boat. We had to take a landing craft ship with a deuce and a half full of gear, and they dropped us off in like the old school over the beach. You go. It
Mhm.
was all the way across the bay. We get a call, and these guys, we become friends with them. We joke around with them, and they think we're cool, and we've got a good rapport. In the call on the radio, the platoon commander just said, "All right, guys, over here. We got to have a little meeting." And he was like, "You guys just stay over there. You keep the Filipino SEALs, you stay over there." And we're like, "Huh? What's up?" And he said, "We just got a call from the Naval Special Warfare Unit, Unit 1, and Corazon Aquino, who was the democratically elected president of the Philippines, her military just launched a coup d'etat against her loyal forces." And they said, "Moreover, the group you're training is part of the rebel faction." So we're like, "Great." So what gives, man? And they're like, "All right, we're waiting further instruction from very high brass. The first President Bush, George H.W., had sent an aircraft carrier into Subic Bay already, so things were starting to get interesting."
Mhm.
And he was backing Aquino. He said, "We are loyal to them. They're an ally. She's democratically elected. We're backing her." And so we're like, "Well, what do we do with these guys? I mean, they're sitting there with it. They've got assault rifles." And they're like, platoon commander was like, "All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a surprise weapons inspection. See how good if you've been keeping these weapons clean, guys." So we're like, "Everybody line up." We kind of went into this. "All right, let me see those weapons. Have you guys been doing these?" And they're kind of confused. And we're like, "Oh, this is bad. Put this on the truck." And we look at the next weapon. We're like, "Too much carbon build up here. Put this one on the truck." And they were just kind of scratching their heads. And we collected all their weapons and just confiscated them from them. We said, "You were still on a U.S. naval base, and and we didn't even tell them what was going on because they didn't know. Their radios didn't even work. They didn't even I don't even think they had batteries for the radios. It was just such crappy gear." And we're just like, "No problem. We're just gonna we something came up and we got to go back to base. So
Uh-huh.
we're just gonna go back to base and see what's next." So we go back to Subic, the main base, and I think about four of us just escorted these guys. I mean, we had to give them their weapons back, but after they were off our base. And so we were just kind of like, "You'll find out what's going on soon enough. Here's your weapon. See you later." And we were locked and loaded too, because we were like, somebody found out somehow and they start getting crazy on us. That would be weird.
Yeah,
But it's a weird situation, man.
that is. I mean, we're coming up on time here, but yeah, that is a that is a very interesting situation, and that they were the rebel. I'm surprised that you would you were able to give the what, but I guess like, what would you do? Were you going to
Yeah,
detain them? Like a, I know, especially when things get political, it's like,
yeah,
what exactly actions are we going to take? Like, but for a brief, short time in your first deployment, you help suppress a coup,
yeah,
at least so
yeah.
at least
Maybe.
hopefully that's what the write up was for your post deployment medals, though.
Oh yeah, we snagged a couple from that. But and there was another story. I mean, we actually maybe get into it in the next episode. We actually got tasked to do something that was going to be crazy, and I'm really glad it didn't have to go down because it was involved Rangers too.
Oh, well, we
Yeah,
gotta save that, and we gotta open up with that in the next one for
yeah,
sure. I
for
think you
sure.
mentioned this to me, but yeah, we definitely need to get into that. Okay, wow. So yeah, eventful, that first workup, that first deployment in the Philippines, helping to uh helping to suppress the
Squash a
coup.
coup.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then train up for something else. Okay, so we'll pick back up there in the next one. Thanks everyone for your time. We'll catch you later. Bye.